Hi, hopefully you can all hear me. I can hear myself echoing, so that's a good sign. As Rob said, I'm going to be taking you through an investigation I conducted in 2021 into Iranian hacktivism. Specifically, I'm going to kind of set the scene a bit, then I'll take you through my investigation step by step. And finally, I'll wrap up with a very brief update on activity I observed this year. I'm conscious it's lunch after this, so I will try and be concise so that we can beat the IR and pen test guys to the buffet. First, I'll introduce myself a bit more. I come from a conventional military intelligence background, and towards the end of my career in the army, I took a particular interest in cybersecurity. And fortunately for me, and perhaps a couple of people in the audience, conventional intelligence translates very nicely into cyber threat intelligence. Now I work with Rob, and I'm Strategic CTI Team Lead at SecAlliance. My day-to-day can involve tracking threat actor activity, monitoring geopolitical events, horizon scanning, and mentoring on more junior members, among other things. I also head up a charity Capture the Flag team, and I'm a member of the international affairs think tank Chatham House. Enough about me. This is Qasim Suleimani. At the time of his death, Qasim Suleimani was a general in the IRGC. Specifically, he headed up the Quds Force. One of 5 branches of the IRGC, the Quds Force reports directly to Ayatollah Khomeini, and is responsible for extraterritorial and military intelligence operations. Suleimani personally has a rather impressive CV. He's assessed to have personally orchestrated support for the Syrian regime, as well as a number of militia operating in the Middle East. It's for these actions and others that Suleimani was designated a terrorist by the US in 2005, was sanctioned by the UN and EU in 2007, and was later sanctioned by the US in 2011. On the 3rd of January 2020, Qasim Suleimani was assassinated in a US drone strike, his body later identified by a prominent red-stoned ring that he famously wore. Now, mass funerals were held for the general in Iraq and Iran and were attended by hundreds of thousands of mourners. Such was the strength of feeling over the general's assassination that shortly after his burial, Iran launched airstrikes on US military bases in Iraq, wounding over 100 soldiers. In what is a great example of the impact of geopolitics on the cyber threat landscape, shortly after the general's assassination, dozens of US-hosted websites were defaced. This meant that when you visited the website, rather than being presented with the intended content, you were presented with what you can see on the left of the slide there, an image of Qasim Suleimani and anti-US rhetoric. Now, in the grand scheme of things, defacements are pretty low skill. You simply scan a website, identify a vulnerability, then exploit it and input your own code. Typically, defacements are conducted by script kiddies and hacktivists who either want to demonstrate some skill to their mates or get their point across. In September of 2020, the US indicted 2 individuals for the Qasim Suleimani defacements. The bottom left, you can see Behzad Mohammedzadeh, an Iranian national who at the time was 19 years of age and is accused of defacing the 51 websites. The bottom right is Marwan Abu Surur, a Palestinian national, accused of providing Mohammedzadeh with access to 7 of those websites. So you're asking, why did I bother to investigate this when you consider that defacements are pretty low impact and hacktivists don't generally present the greatest threat to organizations? Well, I just started working at SecAlliance shortly after the anniversary of the assassination in 2021, and I wanted a project where I could start with little to no background knowledge, put some very basic OSINT skills to the test, see what I could come up with in a relatively short period of time. Ultimately, I wanted to identify links between the individuals indicted for the defacements and the Iranian government, as was rumoured at the time, because how good would that make me look in front of my new boss over there? But also because hacktivists often conduct other cybercriminal activity, and then that cybercriminal activity can impact on organizations we care about, particularly if it's financially motivated. Nation-state groups also like to use malware from cybercriminal groups so that it kind of masks their operations. And in fact, we have seen in the past Tehran conducting supposed cybercriminal activity in order to cover up their actions, such as with the Paysuki ransomware attacks or the more recent incidents of wiper malware disguised as ransomware. So I decided to investigate, but where to start? It's important to note that with OSINT investigations, there is no rigid structure. It depends entirely on the information you're starting with, as well as the individual. Everyone has their own preferred tools and processes that they like to follow. I chose to start this investigation with 2 usernames from the US indictment. You can see on the slide there, Mr. Behzad and Marwan 007, as well as the original defacement itself, which, as you can see, includes Telegram and Instagram accounts linked to Mohammedzadeh. The indictment also included Instagram accounts for Mohammedzadeh and Abu Surur, as well as Zone H profiles. So, what is Zone H, I hear you ask? Well, skids and hacktivists like to brag about what they've been up to. So they submit evidence of their defacements to archive websites. Similar to Wayback Machine, but just for defaced websites. And there are quite a few of these sites out there, Zone H being one of the most prominent. And I really recommend, if you're interested, going and having a dig around, because you never know what you're going to find, and there can be some really interesting threads to pull on and just keep digging. But when you navigate to Zone H, which is on the clear web, by the way, you're presented with this. You can search for Notifier, which is the username of the individual who submitted the defacement, as well as the domain. So if you know a website's been defaced, but no one's claimed it, you can put the domain in here, and you never know, someone might have submitted the defacement and claimed it as their work. I do want to point out that the date filter is awful. You can filter results to either today, last week, or all, which isn't great when you consider that you're always limited to 50 pages of results, no matter what. And also, they get thousands of submissions a day. But yeah, needless to say, when you select mirror in that final column there, you are taken to an archive version of that defacement. Handily, when you start typing in the Notifier search box, it actually offers up suggestions. So when I searched for the Marwan 007 username, as it was in the indictment without any vowels in it, I didn't get any results. But when I added the vowels in, when you remember Arabic's a phonetic language, I got some results. As you can see on the left there weren't many, only 3, and the websites aren't particularly interesting. However, each of the defacements does include the Marwan 007 username without vowels in it at the bottom there, as well as the statement Palestinian hacker. So it's almost certainly the same guy we're looking for, Abu Surur. Also includes Facebook and Instagram accounts, as well as some other usernames. And I've highlighted these with a red box. When it comes to defacements, if you see other usernames listed, particularly preceded with GZ or greets, then those individuals may be members of the same defacement gang, or they may have assisted with the defacement in some way. As for the Facebook and Instagram account on the slide, unfortunately, they were both set to private. A reverse image search of the profile pictures didn't yield any results, and they weren't archived. Now, because of the scope of the investigation, I wasn't going to go set up some SOC accounts and try and DM these guys and friend them. That was a bit out of scope. So a bit of a dead end there. I did, however, identify a GitHub profile using the same username. As you can see on the far left of the slide, the profile is no longer accessible, but there is an archived version. And it uses the same Marwan 007 username. It also includes the Instagram account that was listed on the previous defacement. So again, almost certainly the same guy. Also includes a link to a Discord account on the bottom left there that we hadn't previously seen, and includes 2 repos. One for a spam bot and one for a website vulnerability scanner and exploit tool. Again, fitting the profile of the FBI have of Marwan Abu Surur. The description you can see there even states that it can be used for defacements. Using username search tools, I also identified a number of other social media accounts using the Marwan 007 username, including Twitter, Imgur, SoundCloud, Letterboxd, TryHackMe. There was quite a few out there. But other than confirming what we already knew, mentioning Palestine, defacement in a couple of them, there was nothing really further of interest in those accounts. So I moved on to the Mr. Behzad username, again starting with Zone H. And at the time of my investigation in 2021, there were nearly 2,000 submissions by this Zone H profile, of which only 14 were so-called special defacements. However, the most recent defacement at that time, you can see on the right-hand side of the slide there, calling himself an Iranian hacker. It includes the same Instagram account from the Qasim Suleimani defacements, as well as a Gmail account. Obviously, I didn't email this guy like, "Hi, how are you? What are you up to? Are you linked with Iran?" That would have been a bit weird. The profile also includes more simple defacements, you can see on the top left there, and they were actually submitted on the same day. In fact, the defacements I saw that were submitted by this account, there was no standard formatting. The messaging varied from defacement to defacement, and yeah, it varied. There was no overtly political messaging or specific geographic targeting of websites either, which to me indicated that the defacements in 2020 for Qasim Suleimani were part of a unique campaign by this individual. As for the Instagram account, it was set to private, but you can view an archived version. And again, kind of a couple of defacements in there, nothing particularly interesting that we hadn't seen in the Zone H profile. But in the comment, you can see there something, BAX 26 of Iran, and we'll be coming back to that shortly. I also identified loads of social media accounts using this Mr. Behzad username, which is interesting because it's a very unique username, so it's not likely there's going to be loads of people all using the same username. There was Twitter, Telegram, YouTube, you can see at the bottom there, they even put up videos of them conducting the defacements. Facebook, I found really easily, I just put the username at the end of the URL, which can be quite a handy trick because people can change their profile names, so they won't come up in searches, but they don't change the URL. So it's worth having a try if you're searching on Facebook and you're not coming up with anything. Yeah, there was loads of other accounts. There was even Fortnite and Xbox Live accounts using the username, which was quite interesting. Unfortunately, reverse image searches of the profile pictures, again, no results. And apart from openly claiming that they're an Iranian hacker, they do defacements and a couple more mentions of BAX 26 of Iran. Nothing really interesting in those social media profiles. So once I'd done the first level searches on both of the usernames from the indictment, I could pivot on what I'd found. And the BAX 26 of Iran comments had piqued my interest, so I started there. Again, with Zone H, and sure enough, there is a BAX 26 of Iran Zone H profile. At the time of my investigation, there was nearly 4,000 submissions to that profile, so a highly active account. And the defacements all followed the same format you can see on the far left of the slide. An image of Qasim Suleimani, some text stating either hacked by Iranian hackers, hacked by Persian hackers, hacked by PARS or Iran's cyber army, then hacked by BAX 26 of Iran, and then a list of usernames in the middle. Now, these usernames changed from defacement to defacement, apart from one, which I've highlighted with a red box, though I appreciate it's not very clear. Mamad Warning. This username featured on all of the defacements I viewed from this account, so we'll come back to them shortly. But using all of the usernames from the defacements I viewed, I was able to enumerate likely members of this BAX 26 of Iran group. I'll show you a full org chart later, but from there I was then able to identify social media accounts that belonged or that used the same username as the usernames in these defacements, including on Twitter. Now, one of the very few good things about Twitter, apart from the advanced search, is the suggested accounts feature. I only had to identify 1 or 2 Twitter accounts that used the usernames from the BAX 26 of Iran defacements, and more of them just started getting suggested to me unprompted, which was obviously very handy. I also identified a BAX 26 of Iran Telegram account where defacements from the Zone H profile were regularly posted. Coming back to Mamad Warning, though, and a number of the usernames from the BAX 26 of Iran defacements had their own Zone H profiles and were conducting other defacements unrelated to the BAX 26 of Iran activity. However, Mamad Warning had by far the most submissions into his profile at that time, and I assessed that that individual is the most active member of this BAX 26 of Iran group that I had identified. In fact, the defacements actually matched the formatting exactly to that of the BAX 26 of Iran defacements, and the defacements were also regularly posted in that BAX 26 of Iran Telegram channel, which is obviously quite interesting. In that BAX 26 of Iran Telegram channel, there is one post in particular that caught my eye. And you can see on the left-hand side of the slide there, it is an image of a clear sky report into volatile CEDA APT group activity. Specifically, it's a section analyzing a web shell. The company named the web shell based on the developer's handle, which they had identified when analyzing the code of the web shell. The web shell is called Mamad Warning Sheller. The link between the individual who developed the malware and the APT group is unclear, i.e. whether they knowingly provided the malware to the APT group. However, I assess it's almost certain that the Mamad Warning, who is the developer of this malware, is almost certainly the same Mamad Warning who we've seen on the BAX 26 of Iran defacements. Notably as well, the most prolific, if not only publisher in this BAX 26 of Iran Telegram channel is an account named Muhammad. Now, if those of you aren't aware, Muhammad can be shortened to Mamad. It's kind of like a nickname. So again, while it's not certain, it's highly likely that the individual behind the Mamad Warning account is the same individual posting in the Telegram account. So who are Volatile CEDA? Well, they're a Lebanese APT group, been active since about 2012. They're also known as Lebanese CEDA, and they typically conduct cyber espionage attacks targeting a range of sectors in a number of countries around the world. Notably, they've been linked by researchers to the Hezbollah cyber unit, which is reportedly in turn set up and still supported by the Quds Force. So, and if we think about it, Quds Force support for Hezbollah cyber capabilities, in addition to their military capabilities, does provide Tehran with a kind of useful proxy for their attacks, while affording them a relative degree of deniability. So that brings us full circle back to the Quds Force and, again, the link to Qasim Suleimani. As you can see from the org chart on the slide there are links between the individuals indicted for the Qasim Suleimani defacements and the Iranian government, albeit tentative and slightly distant. They also identified a number of members of the BACS 26 of Iran defacement group, although there are almost certainly others out there. I just didn't identify them in my investigation. They also identified another subgroup called BACS 21 of Iran, and their branding was exactly the same as the BACS 26 of Iran defacements, but I considered it out of scope for my investigation and also for this presentation. One thing I do want to draw your attention to, on the far left of the slide, you can see the username Sniper Joe. This username was mentioned in the Marwan 007 defacements and will become interesting shortly. So that was 2021. But what about this year? Did we see any activity around the anniversary of Qasim Suleimani's assassination? And are the individuals I identified in 2021 still active? Starting with Mr. Behzad, and the Zone H profile had a couple of hundred more submissions, though none later than September of last year, and none for any special defacements. For the social media accounts, the Facebook profile appears to have been deleted. There's no activity in any of the other social media accounts I'd identified, and the Instagram account is still private. However, one thing you can do with private Instagram accounts, as you can see on the bottom left, you can still see who they're following and who's following them. And you can see at the bottom there, the Mr. Behzad Instagram account is following an account with the profile name of Mamad Warning, so another link between them there. Moving on to Mamad Warning and that Instagram account, you can see at the top there, again, it's set to private, so I can't really see anything, what's going in there, it's not archived. It does link to the BACS 26 of Iran Instagram account, but that in turn just has a link to the BACS 26 of Iran Zone H profile. However, one interesting thing to note, you can tell from the profile image, even though I got no results from reverse image searching, there's a prominent tower, and given the context, it's almost certain that that tower is the Burj Tehran in Tehran, so that's almost certainly the skyline of Tehran there. As for the Zone H profile for Mamad Warning, there were only 2 verified submissions after what I'd found in early 2021, and the latest of those was from July of last year, so a massive drop-off in activity there. There is, however, one as yet unverified defacement from January of this year around the anniversary of the assassination that you can see on the bottom right includes an image of Qasim Suleimani, so still a marked decrease in activity from the previous years. As for Marwan 007, there was no activity in any of the social media accounts I had identified the previous year. So yeah, all in all, really quiet. And I do want to stress this doesn't mean that they're not active, that they're not conducting defacements, just that we're not seeing it and we can't observe it. They may have just stopped submitting their defacements to Zone H, preferring another site, or they may have set up other social media accounts and they're bragging about it in there instead. So, apparently separate from the BACS 26 of Iran activity though, there was one defacement that made the headlines this year, and that is of the Jerusalem Post website and Mariv newspaper's Twitter account. As you can see, the defacement features a prominent red stoned ring, which if you remember, Qasim Suleimani was famous for wearing, as well as an apparent missile strike on an Israeli nuclear facility of Dimona. Now, the defacement was conducted on the 3rd of January, so the anniversary of the assassination, but also at the same time, talks were ongoing in Vienna for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, more commonly known as the nuclear deal, which might explain why the nuclear site was featured in the defacement. So I had a bit of a search, because it hadn't been reported who had conducted the defacement. So I searched on Zone H for the Jerusalem Post website to see if anyone had submitted it and was claiming it as their work. And sure enough, an account with the username of Sniper Joe had submitted the defacement. If you remember, this username was listed in the Marwan 007 defacements. So I took a bit of a closer look at the Sniper Joe profile, and there were about, I think it was well, there was quite a lot of defacements for that profile at the time of my investigation earlier this year. But the messaging varied from defacement to defacement, from pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, to more recently, pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine, and Europe. So there was kind of no consistency in the messaging. The defacements did include a link to an Instagram account that you can see top center there. Again, set to private. The profile image is a stock photo from HackerOne, but there is a link to a website there. And that website is an Arabic language website offering tuition in how to hack websites and program in Python, as well as offering a DDoS attack tool and several carding-related tools. So this supposed hacktivist conducting defacements also engages in financially motivated cybercriminal activity. All other images on the website were stock photos, so there's some OPSEC awareness there, and a couple of social media accounts were linked. Another Instagram account, top right, as you can see, follows pretty much exactly the same formatting as the one in the center, and a Telegram account, again with a stock photo from HackerOne. So all in all, hopefully you'll agree that this is kind of a great example of the impact of geopolitics on the cyber threat landscape. Specifically, in this case, the impact on hacktivist intent to target entities assessed as associated with the enemy. And we're currently seeing that play out in Ukraine right now. You can see pro-Russian hacktivists targeting a number of entities in nations that are supposedly aligned with Ukraine, supporting them and enforcing sanctions against Russia. I also identified a tentative link between the individuals indicted for the Qasim Suleimani defacements and the Iranian government, albeit tentative, and also, as I will say again, the link between the developer of the malware and between the volatile Cedar APT group is unknown. Sniper Joe is a great example of a hacktivist who also engages in other cybercriminal activity, and that is by no means rare. So we do need to still pay attention to hacktivists when doing threat assessments. Hopefully, I've also demonstrated how some very simple OSINT techniques can help analysts enrich our investigations. So don't be afraid of using them. Go out there, see what resources and tools work for you. I'd thoroughly recommend digging into Bellingcat and some of their more in-depth OSINT investigations. There's some amazing work they've done. Finally, hopefully, if my presentation's proved anything, it's that threat actor intent and activity changes over time. So you need to monitor it. If we compare the Back 26 of Iran group activity from 2020 and 2021 to this year, we can see a marked decrease in activity. And that's it. I've got a couple of references and kind of resources for you there. But yeah, any questions, fire away if there's time, or just go get lunch.